2, 1. We are now live on Facebook. I'm going to go live on Zoom. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for tonight's Virtual Doctors Night Out. And I'm going to turn it over to our host, Dr. Kellyann.
Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of Doctors Night Out. I am your host, Dr. Kellyann Petrucci, and tonight is a very special night. Not only am I joined by an absolute rock star, one of my tigers, as I call it, a super force, and also a really good friend. We're going to talk about something that we have not talked about on this show yet, and I've been percolating to talk about it. So tonight we're going to address the uncomfortable. Perhaps more than ever, people are prioritizing lifestyle in a really different way. They're trying to take their health into their own hands and spending more money on their well-being. So when individuals think about improving their health and wellness, they look to things like, what is the quality of my food? What about exercise? What about self-care practices? And during our virtual Doctors Night Out, we continue to discuss the need to take control of our health. But here's what I've learned, and I really learned it. Not everyone has access to these lifestyle improvements, and this, my friends, causes social disparity. So how can we start by being part of the solution, not part of the problem? We're going to chat with my friend Maya Feller, who's a registered dietitian and who has been at the forefront of this movement. I've been very proudly watching. So let me tell you a little bit about her before I have her join in. She's a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and founder of a nutritional private practice in Brooklyn. She specializes in nutrition for chronic disease prevention. She's an adjunct faculty at New York University. Maya shares her approachable, real food-based solutions to millions of people through her writing, social media, TV appearance, speaking engagements. She's a recurring guest, and very frequently, I might add, on Good Morning America, Strahan, Sarah and Kiki, Dr. Oz, and more. She is the author of an amazing book called Southern Comfort Diabetes Cookbook. And I have to tell you, I met her on the set of Dr. Oz, and I'm super proud to call her a friend. Welcome to the show, Maya.
Hi, Kellyann. Thank you for having me. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here. And I mean, listen, I've loved you from the day that I met you backstage.
We were on stage and Dr. Oz waiting to go, and we just turned to each other and it was
completely. So again, thank you for having me back.
It's my appreciation to have you. And I have to say, tonight is an interesting topic. And I was just saying before we went on, everyone, that I actually learned so much myself, just really digging into this topic. And there's a lot of shocking information that we're going to learn tonight and that we need to know about. And one of the shocking facts, Maya, is that you shared that 3% of all dietitians are Black. And school nutritionists receive little to no training in something called cultural humility.
Yeah, that's right.
I think this is really important. So tell us what is this cultural humility and why is it so important?
So I'm actually going to tell you something interesting first. I'm always checking on the CDR, which is the Commission for Dietetic Registration, to look at the stats to see what shifted. And it's actually 2.6% of all dietitians are Black. And the last time I checked, there were about 110,000 dietitians total in the US. So that means that anytime anyone goes, to receive nutrition services, they're most likely to receive those services from somebody who is not Black. And on top of that, they're more likely to be white. So also we're talking about people who are not, Latina. We're also talking about people who are not Indigenous. So it's really not people of color. The majority is white women. So yeah, so that's
even more exaggerated than I realized.
It's so shocking. There's so much there. But okay, so to your question about cultural humility, I mean, I think we first have to start with the definition, right? And I want to read you guys the definition from the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health. And they say that cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another culture, but one starts with an examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. So in 1998, there were two healthcare professionals, Dr. Melanie Teveron and Dr. Jan Muri Garcia. They conceived this term. And they created this term as a way to actually educate physicians. And they were educating physicians that were working in these culturally diverse, ethnically, racially diverse populations in the US. And it was this kind of idea for physicians to take this inward look at themselves so that they could better hear their patients and better meet their needs. Because if the person that's sitting in front of you is different from you, right? And just as we pointed out with 2.6% of dietitians being Black, right? Then that means their culture is different than yours. How do you actually relate to them? And how do you deliver patient-centered care if you haven't said, oh my goodness, I'm gonna look inwards, I'm gonna be self-reflective, and then I'm also going to recognize the alternative perspective? Because there are multiple perspectives, right? And if we always say that my perspective is the only one that's valid, then that means that if someone else walks in the room and they share a story, then I get to say, oh no, that's not valid and you've got to do it my way. So with cultural humility, it's really this self-reflective work, but then also kind of doing the work to look forward to your patients, hearing them, right? And also honoring them and recognizing that there are many different ways that people are diverse. And one thing that I always say about diversity is diversity means multiple many, right? So it's not just Black and white. Diversity means Black, Latinx, Indigenous people, people across the diaspora. It means Asian, East Indian, it means Eastern European, Western European. That's diversity. And of course, this moment is about anti-Blackness, so that's what this is centered around. But when we're talking about diversity, it's really all of the cultures because everybody has culture.
That's one of the things, and I think we, even as practitioners, we really have to keep this in mind. And one of the things that I learned being one of two Americans in some of my naturopathic classes, you have to learn about global nutrition. You have to it really does open up a whole different level in patient care. And Maya, really think about this. And I hope anyone who's watching that is a practitioner or that, sees people on any level really in public service, to really, how the whole point is to touch deeply with that person, have an experience with that person where you can really touch them to have effect. That's how you transform. So if our job is to transform and to teach, we really have to touch deeply. And you can't do that if you don't have this broad spectrum kind of thought process. So I guess the question would be, as practitioners, how do we envelop this? How do we start taking this into our practice when it's a word that most people have never even heard of?
Oh, I know. That's such a fantastic question. What you just said, really, this global nutrition idea, I do think that that's part of it, right? Because in the world of wellness, we really work from the single paradigm. There's one way to be healthy, one way to be well. And so if we're thinking, how do we then expand that and treat people without the lens of the oneness, we have to always be people first, right? So it's your patient first. They're coming to us, you, me, as the provider, because they need help. People don't go to see other people if they don't need help. So they're already in this vulnerable position where we, quote unquote, have knowledge and power. And then we are often blaming them the moment they walk in. Something's wrong with you for having the diagnosis. You've done something wrong. You're not adherent. All of our language, even how we're educated, right? Non-compliant.
Shameful.
It's shameful.
It's shameful. And, I have to tell you, and when I was telling you earlier that I learned a lot, I have to tell you, I had to really assess myself and my 20 plus years in practice and realizing some of my languaging has been off. Even though I learned so much in the situation where, most of my learning was, in London and other places overseas where there's all different cultures and such. But I have to tell you, I think we really need to watch our languaging and not have it be shameful. So where do we get these skills? How do we strengthen our skills, Maya?
So I'm going to say something. I want to acknowledge what you said, that you had to look inward. I did also. So I used to say diet-related chronic illnesses, and I sometimes, have to be careful not to, actually not sometimes, always. And I've actually switched to saying non-communicable disease. The reason that I don't use diet-related is because, yes, sometimes it is secondary to diet patterns, but I don't want to blame the patient for having that diet-related chronic illness. And even when I teach, you should ask my students. Probably every second thing is me saying, oh, hold on one second. I really actually wanted to say it this way, because I'm working from a textbook where the language is so biased, right? And it's totally from this very white heteronormative gaze. And so I have to constantly remind them that when you go to the hospital, and especially if you're working in city hospitals, that will not be the majority. So we have to be intentional with our language. Okay, so next you ask, how do we kind of, think about this? So I think it's important to understand the historical significances, right? When we're thinking about how did we get here, we have to take in the structural racism that is present. We also need to take in the institutionalized racism. And I wanted to share some very specific language with you all. And I have these definitions from Keith Lawrence and Terry Keller. And this is from a Race and Public Policy Conference in 2004. And the reason I want to be this specific is because when we're talking about the historical significance of how we got here and how to undo it, we have to know the definitions. So if we're thinking about structural racism in this country, right? So in the continental US, we're talking about the normalization as well as the legitimization of an array of dynamics: historical, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal, that routinely advantage whites while producing cumulative and chronic adverse outcomes for people of color. So it's within the structure, right? So, you look at neighborhoods, and Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color neighborhoods have systematically been redlined. So those neighborhoods have fewer grocery stores. They have more 99-cent stores. What's in 99-cent stores? Junk. It's like, these plastic bags full of Technicolor, cereals with an ingredient list that's this long. There it is. Institutional, right? Institutional racism is a discriminatory treatment and unfair policies and inequitable opportunities and impacts based on race produced and perpetuated by institutions. So that's like school and mass media. So how does that affect us as providers? It's in our books, right? So when I teach at NYU, one of the things that I always say, and I was even on the phone with one of the publishers, and I said, listen, the textbook says all of this data, right? Black people are 10 times more likely to suffer disease burden for X, but there's never an explanation of why. We keep sharing the information and perpetuating that there's this disproportionate disease burden, but there's never a discussion about how did this happen? Why is this happening? And how do we effectively treat and counsel our patients? Because I can't say, and I can tell you, I've seen this in case studies where students have said, give them cauliflower pizza. Well, I mean, if I tell you that your purported case person is living on the standard American diet, to switch to cauliflower pizza may be delicious. However, how feasible is that? And have we even investigated anything about this person before we tell them that we want them to eat cauliflower pizza? So I think it's important for us to really understand the structures that put us in this place. So it's learning and unlearning. I think it's listening. I think it's also committing to the training, right? This work, and I go to trainings myself. Before I was in my private practice, I was running a food and nutrition program in South Brooklyn, and I worked with people who were homeless and unstably housed. And I spent probably the first year of my work going to a minimum of a training per month, because I'd never worked with the homeless population. I had not done a significant amount of work with people who also had mental health conditions concurrent. And so then you add the layer of infectious disease, and then you add the layer of food insecurity. And so that kind of, I'd say all of that coming together, I needed training. And so I committed to doing training over the course of a year, as well as continuing education the entire time that I worked there, so that I would be a partner in health rather than a do it this way.
And, I think it's really interesting, one of the things that you said about unlearning.
Yes.
Everyone really heard that, because in order for us to really initiate a push, there has to be unlearning.
Right.
That's going to be a big part of it. I have to tell you, as part of Doctors Night Out, one of the things that I always say is that you have to take charge of your health.
Yes.
You have to take charge of it. And I'm realizing now this may be a very privileged statement.
Yes.
And so I have to kind of circle back and think about that. And so new data shows that there's no question that the COVID-19 mortality rate is higher for Black Americans.
Yes.
There's no question about it. So this, of course, you and I would draw the analysis now that this is because of social inequities. Am I right?
Yes.
I mean, so how much is this impacting the Black communities from what you can see?
So I love this question, by the way. And I have been actually reaching out to various experts across multiple public health fields to actually have these discussions, right? What does it mean to talk about social determinants of health? What does it mean to even talk about health, right? Because just as you said, we have to take charge. Well, what do you need to be able to take charge? You need education, which, I mean, right, I'm going all the way back. So that means that you need a well-funded public school. You need a public school where people are learning math, science, music, art, physical education, right? Not just teaching to a test. And of course, people are like, well, what does that have to do with nutrition? Well, if children from a young age are not able to be rounded with regard to their education, right? And they're not, and it's a place that, you know, is actually fun,
Yeah.
then I know, right? I think about my kids all the time. You know, my daughter's in second grade, and not to go off topic, but at the end of the school year, regularly, they spend more time outside. Teachers will be in the playground. It'll be a beautiful day, and they'll say, do you know what? We're just going to stay outside. And there's that flexibility of body, mind, and spirit that balances out the education. But if you've got kids that are in situations where they have to learn to attest, then they're learning to attest. You don't get critical thinking. You don't get this kind of expansive view. You don't get the opportunity to hope, dream, and wish. And so if we think about what these cycles of poverty look like, right, and the cycles of disadvantage look like, you're basically shuttling children into an underfunded system that doesn't serve them and is structurally racist and filled with implicit bias. So it's like we have to, like, just as you said, unlearning, it's really about, I mean, it is to some level about dismantling, but it's also about restructuring.
I see that, and the implicit bias is what bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I really feel. You talk about demantling, restructuring, deconstructing, all of that. That's what has to be pulled apart and changed, in my opinion, and that's where the work is. But so you and we are not new to forging new paths.
Mm-hmm.
This has been the mainstay of our career, and it's really a part of our DNA. But what about the person who is on the other side of this? Yeah. And they are suffering, whatever it is, diabetes, whatever issue it is, and they don't know what to do. How do they make a change? I mean, as healthcare practitioners, it's one thing, but how does someone on the other side of this go in and try to make a culturally inclusive, representative system
right.
them?
So, you know, for a provider who wants to be an ally to Black communities and also communities of color and communities where Indigenous people live, I would say, committing to regular and consistent anti-bias, anti-racist, culturally sensitive training so that they can begin to change their interactions, their individual interactions with patients. I think it's also important if people, you know, like us are in positions where they can hire people to support them, that they think about diversifying their staff, right?
Good point. Great point.
Like 100%. So, you know, and when I say diversifying, I really mean diversifying. I don't mean that everyone has to be all Black or all Latinx or, you know, all, you know, Indigenous people. I really mean diversifying your staff, because when you have multiple perspectives, it can only enrich your practice. And depending on if it's the mission of the practice to really serve the underserved, then it's about community outreach, right? So going into the community and saying, all right, yes, I know I'm here. How can I be a partner in your journey? And what is it that you want? right? How can I serve you? This reminds me, this is not health related, but this reminds me of a big debacle in my neighborhood with the arts place, where people from the community were really upset because they said, you never asked us what we wanted. We walk in, we do love what you're offering, but you didn't ask us. And everyone that's in a major position of power or decision-making position is a white person. And they don't see diversity within the staff. Yet everybody that services the place is incredibly diverse. So everything from, so really speaking with your community and finding out what is it they want. And then also I'd say, this is a big, big, big thing. And I was talking to someone about this in my personal life the other day, that for the most part, we spend time with people who are like us, right? I gravitated toward you because I see myself in you, right? And so I feel comfortable with you. We share similar ways of thinking about patient care. So of course I want to spend time with you. I generally don't spend time with people who are different from me, which could be good and bad, right? But if you're really in this kind of preliminary stage, seek out spaces where there are people who are not like you. So
that's so important. I have to say, because even as a journalist, and in a sense, you're also a journalist on top of being a healthcare provider. I mean, you're on Good Morning America and such all the time. You're a journalist. And in order to be a good journalist, you have to be willing to see things you may not want to see.
Exactly.
You have to be willing to go outside of your normal way of thinking, or things that aren't, as you said, is equally matched. So there's a lot of us, some people are still in quarantine, but other people are starting to get out and they're going into offices and such. What about this whole social media impact? I'm very curious as to what you think about this, because some people feel like if you're not involved in the sweeping debate of everything that's going on,
right,
then it's part of the problem. And it's been kind of a stalemate. It's been kind of a very interesting situation for people, even influencers, and deciding, and I hear about this from so many health people, what do you put out? What do you not put out? What's offensive? What's not offensive? What is your take on this whole situation, and what does social media play in all this?
Social media has been huge. So there've been a number of campaigns like Share the Mic and Amplify Melanated Voices. And, I had quite a few white wellness influencers who gave me like a lot of love on social media, over the course of this 1 week where there was this Amplify Melanated Voices hashtag. And that was fantastic, right? And I'm incredibly grateful for the new followers. And I'm so happy to have this, kind of engaged boost of people there. To your question, right? Do you speak? Do you not speak? I think that our country is in this moment, this racial awakening, where people have recognized that the violence against Black bodies is incredible. I mean, it gives me pause, like beyond pause, right? And so we want people to speak out. The question, just as you said, is how much do you speak out? I really think for influencers, a lot of us work with brands. And I can tell you something that I do. Someone will reach out to me and they'll say, oh, we'd love to send you product. And I say, that sounds great. Would you consider sending 500 units to a charity of my choice?
That is, everyone listen to that. That is sensational. That is some of the best. So, because we get sent products all of the time. We always have people reaching out wanting to send things, and that is beautiful. Send it to someone who needs it.
And then usually by then I choose, an organization. There's one organization that I love so much. And it's run by this incredible, Caribbean woman who has a PhD. She's such a boss lady, So it's the Bed-Stuy Campaign Against Hunger. Okay. And they, before COVID, they were feeding 30,000 meals a month, and now they're feeding, I think, 90,000, I mean, it's like incredible. And so I have a couple of sponsorships where I'm going to do kind of a giveaway, and they're going to, give a number of units to the Campaign Against Hunger. They also have a community garden where they have youth that go in and plant, and then, the produce is actually available to the people in the community. So, engaging in things like that, I think it's incredible. I also think too, for people who are really big wellness influencers, not to be afraid to share the space, right? Someone said to me today, oh, will you come on my show and will you talk about food justice? And I said, yeah, but that's not really my area of expertise. I said, what if we get someone from New York Food Policy to come on with me? I believe that there's enough space for all of this. So for a wellness influencer to say, I'm so happy for the work, and the work will continue to come, right? What does the rest of the team look like? And for me, even like when someone says, who are speakers that you're thinking of? I give an array of speakers, right? So I will always think of a diverse group of people that I'm suggesting.
So yeah, that's how you become inclusive. So let's turn this to when we see patients.
Yeah.
When we see patients, one of the things that I think really I've learned a lot, and it bothers me quite a bit, it's that when you're talking about weight loss and you're talking about, getting someone healthy,
yeah,
we tend to put a stamp on, this is what you should weigh,
yeah,
and this is what you should look like, and this is the look.
Yeah.
There is so much diversity, cultural diversity, that changes our body's shape. And so how do you address this, and how should practitioners start looking at this? Because different parts of the globe, it shows very differently, on our body.
Yeah. So the first thing that I say to people is, weight bias is real. I can't tell you how many, and we've talked about this, right? I've had patients who've gone into the doctor's office for, I had one woman who went in for PCOS related problems. And the first thing that was told to her was, you need to lose weight. That's, from my perspective, that's not even patient-centered care, because you don't allow the person to say what they're there for. And so I think that as providers, we have to recognize that weight bias is also steeped in anti-Blackness. Because if you historically look at Black bodies, they've always been demonized, right? Except for to take care of people's children or to be wet nurses, you know what I mean? And that stuff is very deep. But Black bodies have been demonized. And even recently, I feel like in the media, we hear all the things that people have said about the, Venus and Serena Williams, things that they would never say about other athletes ever, just so disrespectful. Even our previous first lady, right? So the Black body has been feared. And I would say to providers, not to start with weight, to actually allow your patient to say what they're there for. Something that I often do when someone comes to me, and yes, it's nutrition, is I say, what do you understand about the diagnosis that you've received? Because then that lets me know, where they are and how to better meet them. And then my second question is always, so why nutrition? Why now? And how can I help you? And then we work together. So I think when we're thinking about body composition, shape, size, there is no one size, right? And if we come at this from this really, weight bias lens, we're not serving anyone. And we're also truthfully perpetuating the desire to make whiteness, for the most part, in a specific type of whiteness, I should say, right? Because not all white people fit into this either. It's a specific type of whiteness that is perpetuated by many media outlets, right? And that's part of that structural, right? We want, that's part of the institutional, that we want to recognize that we've kind of consumed that. It's in the air. We took it in, we internalized it, and we were like, this is the only way. And so we've got to counsel everyone that way. Like you, I work from the perspective of metabolic health. So if I have a patient that comes in and we're looking at their blood sugar, or if we're looking at inflammatory markers, my question is, how do I always bring those back within? And I've even switched this language from normal to expected.
See, this is really golden here, because this is how the languaging is where it all starts.
Yeah.
And I love that. You ask the person what they want to get out of this, and then look at the numbers and try to match the two. And I love that. That's really important. And the bias doesn't stop just at weight, because you even had an incident that I read about, actually. You didn't tell me, but I read about this in the beauty industry.
Yeah.
Where you I guess you received a gift.
Yeah.
you could not use this gift. And I want to know, explain the story, and I want to know how that made you feel.
So I went to the beauty counter, and it was my birthday gift that I was going to receive, and it was a foundation, and there were two shades, and it was peach and I think like a deeper peach. And I have very dark skin. And I said to the woman, I said, this is ridiculous. I said, what am I supposed to do with this? And I said, I can't use this birthday gift. And I'm like a loyal customer, right? I mean, the quantity of makeup that I purchase, and especially now, it's like, there's a lot. And in that moment, I said, my gosh, I said, I am not part of this retailer's thought process. My dollars don't matter, or not enough that they would offer something that would fit my shade. And I remember saying, I'm going to write the management and say, like, how could you not have choices for people? And I wrote them an email saying, it's unacceptable and that there are multiple shades, right? I have friends who come from India who are exactly my complexion, maybe a little deeper, but these are dark brown friends of mine. And I think the response that I got back was, we're sorry that you had that experience. and I mean, for me, truthfully, Kellyann, I was just like, oh, you know what? I just don't matter in their eyes. But I have to tell you that I've had that experience so often that I almost think like it doesn't hurt because it's so continuous. And interestingly enough, I noticed that when the country had this huge racial awakening, that's when I felt the pain. Because everybody was saying, oh my goodness, look at what's happening. Meanwhile, for years, we've all been saying, oh my goodness, look at what's happening. I've got a 12-year-old who we are so petrified about him going out by himself. From him being a young kid, we've always talked about how do you interact with police? What is the way that if you're stopped, you respond? Like, how do you
hearing it? It's been, and like you said, it's been a normal part of your life that it's almost like you shut off. You don't feel pain as much anymore. So what would you say in your life? What do we do about this, in your opinion? What would be the first step that we can take so the pain stops and this doesn't become normal anymore? What would you recommend that we do as a population?
I mean, as a population, this moment has to be a movement. I think everybody has to commit on some level to, for example, what you're doing here, right? Sharing with your viewership these discussion topics, right? Everybody's saying that we have to talk about this. We have to learn from this. And then also for people who have children, really the exposure, right? From a young age, we know that kids see skin color and skin tone. We also know that as young as a year old, kids also internalize kind of attributions as positive or negative in response to skin tone because it's taught. And so if there's anybody that has a child, it's about doing things like as simple as having books in your home with people from different places in the world, right?
Yes.
People who speak different languages, and reading with your child, having dolls with an array of shades, right? And that goes for the boys too. So really thinking about creating an inclusive home. I also say in like a very natural and organic way, seek out friends from other backgrounds other than your own. Right? Mm-hmm. Like I have a friend who's Korean who always makes a joke, and she's like, in some circles, I'm like these people's only Asian friend. And I was like, so get more than just the one, and it doesn't.
That's great advice.
Right? The cleaning woman doesn't count, and neither does the babysitter.
Move beyond that.
Exactly.
Discussions. And I think these discussions are really important to have with your children. And I want to ask, and for me, this is a big one. What you have two beautiful daughters, and when they're married, and down the road, and they're married, and what what do you want the world to look like?
You know, I thought about that so much. I really thought about that question, and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know. I mean, first things first, of course, I want the world to be a place of equity where, people have opportunities that are equitable. I also, too, really, in combination with racial justice and equity, I want the world to be a place where they can breathe fresh air and drink clean water and have access to affordable, nutritious food. I want them to be gainfully employed. I want them to feel safe when they go outside. And I want them to be able to choose who they spend their life with, you know? I mean, I want so much. And that's the thing, because I'm such a holistic person like you, I can't separate and racism and environmental injustice. They go together.
They go together. 100% they go together. Do you think, right, because I've learned so much from you and even tonight and such beautiful messaging. Do you think it's because you were raised by activists that it instilled something in you? Talk a little bit about, I want to end by telling me a little bit about how you were raised, and because you have such passion for this and such a natural fluidity in how you speak about this that I can tell it's really soulful.
Yeah.
So does that come from how you were raised?
I think so. I was raised in a mixed race lesbian household. So, and it's really, my dad was also around. Like my biological parents divorced, but then my mom raised me with a white woman. And all three of my parents are still very much in my life. And my dad himself is a major activist. So it wasn't like a question, right? About like whether or not you're going to care about social justice. I grew up going to marches. Even for college graduation, I'll never forget, my mom was like, and one of your gifts will be that we're going out to feed the homeless. And I was like, oh, that's so thoughtful. We're going to go to a shelter. She was like, oh, no. She's like, we're going to get a table and we're going to go to Tompkins Square Park and we're going to have a party with them. And I was like, really? And she was like, oh yeah. She cooked for days and she bought a couple of cakes and she also had money too. And so she gave each person a plate of food, a piece of cake, and $1. And I stood at the end and I had maybe 200 people shake my hand and wish me luck in my life.
I don't even know how you can't really put words to how that's going to affect a child.
Right.
That was definitely current waves for your path.
Yeah.
Unquestionably.
Yeah.
So Maya, what do you want everyone to know in closing? And I went a little over tonight because this is just such for me, a profound topic that I've been really wanting to bite into. What do you want everyone to know?
So, I want everyone to know that they can absolutely be involved in this movement. For some people, it's going to be out on the streets on a long-term, consistent basis. And for some people, it's going to be about, reaching out to their council members and their local officials and getting involved with their local school districts. There's different ways that we're all going to do this work, but we all have to commit to doing the work on some level, way, shape, or form. And there is no wrong way to do it, right? It's messy, it's imperfect. And I think that's okay.
And I love that. And I will tell you where my passion comes from. When one of the things that I wanted to do was give back and contribute when I got out of school and started working and so forth. And I created this program called Super Kids Wellness. And I ended up putting this program together for young children. And I would go to different schools and the kids would get science credits and I would teach them all about foods and such. Then this farm said, we want you to have these programs here. It's called Gravity Hill Farms. It was in New Jersey, this beautiful farm. They said, we're actually going to build a schoolhouse. And we want to have different schools come here and you teach them about the body. And then we'll do the harvest, in the fall with that harvest and in the spring with that harvest. We'll teach the kids all about, how to pick vegetables. I was absolutely blown away that there were so many children that really, truly, they didn't even know what a carrot was.
Yes.
I do not. And I remember being so absolutely realizing how lucky I was. And, you know, one of the parents came up to me and we were talking about foods, and she pulled me aside and she said, Kellyann, I think what you're doing is wonderful,
Yeah.
but I cannot afford these foods for my children.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that you're getting her all excited about it, but we cannot afford these foods.
Right.
And these are just vegetables. And I expect kids not to know what a jicama is and things like that. But when it's something like simple as onions, carrots, things like they really,
Right.
a lot of them didn't ever see one before.
Right. Right.
So that's where my passion comes in. And that's why I want to take a stance, and I want to make sure that we do something
Right.
about making this good, making it right, doing the right thing. So
That's
what I am asking everyone to do and the audience to do is just wake up tomorrow and do one thing. Always think in doing the right thing and open your mind. We need to really, as you said, Maya, unlearn and relearn from a much broader global perspective.
Yes.
And that's honestly to everyone out there. And Maya, thank you so much. As usual, so elegantly put everything. I appreciate you so much.
I appreciate you, and you have always been so generous with me. And I don't take any of that ever for granted. I feel like there are people that you're meant to meet in your life, and paths are meant to be crossed. And
Same. You are extraordinary, and you are a force, and you are one of my tigers, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do to carve out even more justice. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for watching tonight. Maya, please tell everyone where they can get more of you.
Yeah, so you can find me online, Maya Feller Nutrition. That's my website, all one word. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter at Maya Feller RD, and I'm on Facebook, Maya Feller Nutrition.
Okay, get more of Maya Feller. She is definitely Dr. Kellyann approved. Until next time, I am signing out with all the peace and love. You'll find us here on Monday nights and Thursday nights, and of course during the day, all the other days at noon for our Instagram Live Quick Fire, where I bring to you doctors I know, love, and trust, many of whom I've broken bread with. They are committed to their growth, all to serve you. They are your true seekers. Until then, signing out with peace and love. Bye-bye. Thanks again, Maya. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.